So, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the Cowichan Connectivity Open House. We appreciate you giving up some of your evening to spend some time with us tonight. I'm Brittany Taylor with Economic Development Cowichan, part of the Cowichan Valley Regional District. I'm joining you this evening from my home on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people. I want to acknowledge that the CVRD and this project are working on the traditional territories of the Cowichan, Malahat, Subatset, Halalt, Penelakut, Stamanis, Liaxin, Cowichan, Dididat, and Pachidat peoples. And we are so fortunate and grateful to work here. I want to provide just a quick little bit of background before we get started. In November 2020, the CVRD board updated its strategic plan, which guides the organization's work. One of the key actions under the new plan is to develop a connectivity strategy and pursue provincial and federal funding to support the delivery of broadband service to all communities in the CVRD. Economic Development Cowichan has been working on this project ever since. And we've recently contracted the fantastic team at IBI Group to help us out, and I'll let them introduce themselves in just a moment. Over the last 6 weeks or so, we've been working with IBI to look at the current state of cellular and internet connectivity around the region. And we want you to be part of the process. So this open house is designed to introduce you to the team and provide you with some background on what connectivity is all about. And then we want to focus on getting some feedback from everyone here to help guide us in creating a vision for the future of connectivity for the region. So as you'll see through tonight's presentation, connectivity is a fairly complex topic. That's why we're so pleased to have IBI Group on board. They bring extensive expertise in design and implementation of these networks from a community perspective. So with that, I'll pass it over to the IBI team to introduce themselves and dive into tonight's content.
So you can't see me right now, but my name is Asia Stanty. I've been a planner with IBI Group for over 6 years. I work in a couple different areas, including engagement, climate change and flood risk assessments, and broadband services. I'm going to let Amanda introduce herself next.
Hi everyone, I'm Amanda Plini, also working with IBI Group. I'm a planner, and on this project I'm assisting with the public engagement efforts along with Asia.
And then I'll hand it over to Mitch to introduce himself.
Thanks, Asia. I'm Mitch Taylor. I am the project manager for this project with the CVRD. I'm also a business analyst and part of the broadband team for Canada, based in Victoria, and also part of the managed services group for broadband, the broadband group. Pass it over to John.
Hi, I'm John George with IBI Group. I'm a technical consultant and business analyst with a strong background in telecommunications and power infrastructure.
And then finally, we have Keith.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Keith Ponton, IBI Group. I'm a director with IBI Group and the senior practice lead for our telecommunications practice, and pleased to join you this evening. Thank you.
I should just mention the reason that Amanda and I are the only people whose names are on there is just because we're the engagement leads for this project. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'll take the presentation from here for the most part. At IBI Group, we like to start our larger meetings with a climate moment. They're kind of like a safety moment, except they have to do with the climate. I'm going to take over this one. These here are reusable facial tissues. Facial tissue and other tissues have a disproportionate impact on the Canadian boreal forest, which contains 1/4 of the world's remaining intact forests. This is important to note because the boreal forest is home to more than 600 Indigenous communities. It holds more carbon than all of the currently accessible oil, gas, and coal reserves combined. And it's also essential habitat for a number of species. So keeping it intact and alive is vital. Clear cutting in the Canadian boreal forest releases, on average, 26 million metric tons of CO2 each year, which, when you put that into perspective, is equivalent to 12% of the emissions that Canada has agreed to cut annually by 2030. Canada is the largest producer of the type of softwood lumber that ends up in virgin pulp tissue production, like toilet paper, paper towel, facial tissues, things like that. But tissue products don't have to be made from virgin pulp. As you can see, they can be made from post-consumer products or something entirely different, like what I have here on the screen. These are boxes of reusable tissues, like old school hankies. They're made of organic cotton. You take the clean ones out of the top, and then you put the gross dirty ones back in the bottom. They're separated by a silicone divider, and when they're all used up, you put them in the washing machine and you clean the containers either in the dishwasher or you can clean them by hand. And then each box of reusable tissues can replace supposedly up to 9,300 single-use tissues, but I am not even close to wearing any of them out, so I have no idea if that's true or not. Plus, then it takes into account also the associated packaging and shipping. So that's just a little climate moment. I really like them. They're really nice and soft on my nose. And now we'll get into the actual meat of the presentation. So today we're going to be going through a couple of ground rules. We're going to be going over the project overview, some education, what is broadband, some broadband 101, how much speed do you need, the current state of the connectivity in Cowichan, the project timeline, some future steps, a visioning exercise, going over some constraints and opportunities and creating a nice word cloud. And then we're going to do a wrap up and answer any questions you have. So something that Brittany should have told you, but forgot, I will tell you now, this meeting is being recorded. If that is a problem, you can feel free to leave now. It is going to be posted on the engagement website. Your microphones are automatically muted and cameras are off for all of the attendees. If you are experiencing any bandwidth or audio issues, first you can maybe try phoning in using one of the numbers that are listed here on the screen. The access code is below, or you can also try, it should have been in the email that you received when you registered. So, but you won't be able to see the screen, you'll just be able to phone in. We will have a question and answer at the end where we will answer all of your questions. So you can type them into the question and answer as they arise, but we'll answer them all at the end. Maybe just try to be respectful, no foul language, try to be open-minded, make sure you're challenging the ideas and not the people, and assume that everybody is has a positive intent. Maybe they may have phrased it wrong, but everybody has a positive intent. And in order to post a question, there is 3 little dots. There are 3 little dots down at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen that are used to open the question and answer panel. Select all panelists and then type in your question and then click send. If you are phoning in by phone, and we will go over this again at the end because it's a lot of instructions. To raise your hand by phone, dial *3, and then you'll show up as caller user 1 or caller user 2. We won't be able to know your actual name, so we will let everyone know when we're about to unmute a phone participant. When we do, you'll hear 2 beeps. So when you hear 2 beeps, you know it's your turn to speak and you can unmute yourself by pressing *6. And then you can lower your hand by dialing *3 again. So we'll go over that at the end if there's any callers, if there's any voice callers. All right. The purpose of the project this is a bit of a project overview. The purpose of the Cowichan Valley Regional District specifically is undertaking a regional connectivity strategy. The purpose of that is to provide a framework to meet the region's future internet and cellular connectivity needs. The purpose of this engagement process is to educate the public, to gain some community input, develop a collective vision for the future regional connectivity strategy. We want to add some input into the vision for the regional connectivity strategy and educate you on what is broadband. The role of the Cowichan Valley Regional District overall is to create healthy, livable, and efficiently serviced communities for residents of all backgrounds and income levels. When it comes to connectivity, the role is to develop a regional connectivity strategy, examine gaps in the connectivity, and then find ways to address those gaps. They also want to explore digital aspirations and where connectivity can take the region in the future. They want to pursue provincial and federal funding as well in order to support improved broadband for all of the communities within the Cowichan Valley region. While broadband internet is widely accessible in many cities across Canada, it is often difficult to come by in rural and remote locations. In 2019, studies showed that only 45.6% of rural households in Canada and 34.8% of households in Indigenous Canadian communities had access to 50 megabytes per second download over and 10 megabytes per second upload compared to 98.6% of urban homes. This is a number that you're going to see quite a bit, this 10 megabytes per second. Is a number that you're going to see a number of times throughout this presentation. This is what the Government of Canada and the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, or the CRTC, it's a bit of a mouthful. They use it as a threshold for determining funding availability and essentially what internet speed is needed in order to be able to carry out a lot of the necessary services in today's world. Recognizing that internet access and applications will continue to develop into the future, the Government of Canada is making a lot of efforts to invest in scalable infrastructure, primarily focusing on fiber optic. The Canadian government has set a goal to meet a minimum target of that 10 megabytes per second download upload speed for all Canadians, and as a result has committed significant funding to help rural and Indigenous communities reach this target. In March of 2020, so just not too long ago, the Government of Canada announced a joint investment of $830 million in partnership with the Government of BC to connect every home, business, and community in BC to high-speed internet by 2027. The Cowichan Regional Connectivity Strategy is a crucial first step in preparing the region to take advantage of this infrastructure funding opportunity. The Connected Coast project is a fiber optic project that is already underway. It's going to bring new or improved high-speed internet accessibility to rural and remote coastal communities along the BC coast. By 2023, the Connected Coast project is scheduled to deliver subsea fiber optic cable landing sites to several communities in Cowichan. And the Cowichan Regional Connectivity Strategy will help determine how best to benefit from this new infrastructure. Now we're going to go into a little bit of education. So some broadband 101 to start off with. Historically, the private sector has been almost the sole investor in internet and cellular connectivity. This has made it really costly for people to acquire good quality broadband internet service for reasonable costs, particularly where there's a low population density that's unable to front the high cost of building the infrastructure required to support it. With increases in public funding, we're seeing more activity and availability of high quality, reliable broadband availability at a reasonable cost come online, such as fiber to the home or fiber optic directly to people's houses. Currently, connectivity across the region, like many rural and remote locations, is mainly using fixed wireless cellular data or public Wi-Fi hotspots. On a daily basis, more and more people require access to fast, reliable internet at a reasonable price, not unexpected, in order to carry out daily tasks for work, for school, for daily living. And so having this reliable internet at a reasonable cost is going to be benefiting individuals and society, so that people are able to carry out these tasks. I think everybody saw during the pandemic how necessary it was to either work from home, perform school at home, just be able to access the internet kind of wherever you were and not be bogged down by other people using it at the same time, or just having it at all, really. Which begs the question, what is broadband internet? That's kind of the basic question we want to answer. Broadband internet is one of the advances in technology that can help people access the internet and refers to various methods of transmitting high capacities of data across long distance at high speeds. It allows people to upload and download data at the same time and can be accomplished using various media, including coaxial cables, fiber optic cables, radio waves. The fastest and most reliable and most future-proof of these is fiber optic cables. We'll go into a little bit more depth on these. We'll spend a little bit of time on this slide because there's quite a lot here. So we'll start at the left and we'll go into some depth on these, and we'll move over to the right. So on the left-hand side there, we have DSL, stands for Digital Subscriber Line, or sometimes Digital Subscriber Loop. It transmits digital data over telephone lines. It's fairly reliable since it's a hard line. It's also relatively affordable, but it's also one of the slower forms of broadband available. It's also relatively easy to come by because it transmits digital data over telephone lines, so it's fairly widely available. The typical speeds you'll find are anywhere between 5 and 35 megabytes per second, and I should just note that all of those speeds down at the bottom are download speeds, which are usually faster than the upload speeds you'll find. The next one we have is cellular. Cellular you can sometimes see it referred to as wireless internet, broadband wireless, or cellular internet. These all imply that the internet itself is being delivered wirelessly to a single device, like your phone or iPad. This in turn may be connected to another device, for example, using it as a hotspot. Cellular wireless is the most popular form of mobile broadband. One of the pros is that the cell phone range is usually pretty good and prices are okay unless you have a data cap. The con there is that overage charges are usually expensive if you go over that data cap. Also, some rural areas may be too far away from the towers, the cell towers, to get good high speeds. It should also be noticed that cellular is cellular Wi-Fi, sorry, or cellular internet, not Wi-Fi. Cellular internet is not Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is the term for wireless service on high frequencies that is inside a household. The typical download speeds you'll see here are 25 to 100 megabytes per second. The next one there is satellite. Satellite internet is a method of delivering internet service via satellite connection. It's fairly intuitive. This one here is accomplished by transmitting data from providers' offices up to satellites in orbit, and then broadcast data down to subscribers like households or businesses that have reception dishes at their locations. Satellite has traditionally been a good way to reach remote locations, but it can often have slow speeds, sometimes high prices, and is also susceptible to weather interference, and also sometimes low data caps. It transmits wirelessly on lower frequencies than Wi-Fi. And it is also not the same as mobile LTE. So satellite internet is broadcast from satellites in space, while mobile LTE is distributed by cell phone towers, distributed around cities and communities. Typical download speeds here are usually range from 10 to 80 megabytes per second. The next one we have here is coaxial cables. They transmit data from point to point using electricity. It's also pretty widely available, similar to the DSL, but it's newer. It's pretty widely available, and you'll see it often bundled with your television service because coaxial cables can transmit both television and internet through the same cable. It is newer though and faster than DSL, so you can get higher speeds, usually around 10 to 500 megabytes per second. Then we have the fixed wireless. It's two-way communication from radio tower, so that would be the internet provider, to the subscriber location, that customer, whether that is a residential or business. It's a good way to reach remote locations, but it can be susceptible to weather interference, can be slow, especially at those busier times of day when there's high traffic use. It is shorter range, especially when it requires a line of sight, so it's not very ideal for heavily forested areas, long distances, when there's, winding roads, that kind of thing. The typical download speeds for that one are 10 to 100 megabytes per second. And then finally, we come to fiber optic. This one converts electrical signals to light, which is then transmitted through bundles of fiber optic strands that are wrapped in a reflective case. The speed at which fiber transmits data is significantly greater than comparable technologies, such as the wired technologies like cable or DSL, but it does require the installation of fiber infrastructure. So this has a significant upfront investment because it requires the provision of fiber optic cable to each location. So you'll have to be digging something through the ground if it's not already there. And because of this, there's currently limited coverage because of that upfront investment. Typical download speeds are the highest of all of them, ranging from 250 to 1,000 megabytes per second. And just as a comparison, you can see in this chart here where we have all of them, you can see that the upload and download speeds are highest for fiber optic, followed by cellular. The coaxial cables has quite a differential between the upload and download speeds, and then followed by fixed wireless, satellite, and DSL. And so that brings us to how much speed do you actually need? So maybe you're only just checking your email and you actually don't need very much speed. You can do that, on your phone, and you only need 5 megabytes per second, and that's totally fine. Then on the other side, if you're running a business and you need 10 people to be online at the time, all at the same time, doing video conferencing, uploading large files, then you might be one of the people who's down at the other end, needing, 1,000 megabytes per second. So these are all of the things that you might need, and for how many people. Faster internet and higher bandwidth allow more people to be using the internet and performing multiple activities at the same time without interfering with each other's experience. And that's kind of one of the key things there, is that more people can be doing more things at the same time without downgrading each other's experiences as you go on to the right. When we begin to talk about connectivity and communication, there are often a couple things that come up, mainly those being radio towers and 5G signals. Radio signals, including those used for 5G signals, have been used for decades to provide communication. Their safe use is regulated by the federal government, and specific safety codes and inspections are in place to ensure that there's no danger to the public. On the other side, traditional 911 emergency systems do rely on telephone, landline, and cellular connections. So ensuring that there is solid connectivity throughout the region is really important for safety in an emergency. In areas where these things are not available, or if they're overloaded due to a natural disaster, like a fire or flood, internet social media, such as Twitter, have been used to coordinate and communicate with the public. So broadband connections can play a really important role when it comes to public safety and emergency responses and recovery. Next up, we have some environmental impacts. When you take into account the actual implementation of the broadband, some things do have more impacts than others. Environmentally conscious network operators are already in the process of building eco-efficient networks. They have reduced footprints that can decrease the use of raw materials. They have lower power consumption, and they lessen their impact on the physical world while also reducing operational expenses. There is the impact of actually building the network. You do have to go in and actually dig into the ground, but afterwards there is almost no trace left behind. Today's networks and the people who build them are replacing multiple different specialized forms and bringing them all together with one intelligent platform. These one intelligent platforms, they can deliver multiple services in one, as opposed to having multiple different networks, and they get more functionality from smaller footprints and using fewer raw materials. These new technologies also allow network designers to reduce their network power usage because they're only using one network, and so the usage per megabyte is dramatically reduced. We are on to funding and implementation. As we mentioned before, relying on private sector investment has stalled the building of broadband infrastructure to rural and hard-to-reach locations. But now federal, provincial, and local governments have started to invest and fund broadband infrastructure so that it can be operated as an open access network that then allows local internet providers to use publicly funded infrastructure and just come onto that network. Public-private partnerships, also known as P3 models, with private investor funding, have also started to emerge as the popular funding model. Some federal and provincial grant programs require the development of shovel-ready projects to support grant funding applications. Things like dig once policies, implementing dig once policies to include a conduit for future fiber deployments alongside any road construction, any widening projects or water system investments can help reduce costs for future deployments. And so implementing things like that can really help further things along. There are also opportunities to discuss connectivity strategies with neighboring communities and counties to connect with the connected coast sites and to obtain funding, particularly where speeds are below that 10 megabyte per second threshold. I'm going to talk now a little bit about the current state report. IBI Group and CVRD are currently generating a current state report as part of the regional connectivity strategy. An initial review of the current state of connectivity across the Cowichan district has found that 96% of premises are served, while 4% are underserved, based on that CRTC minimum broadband speed of 50 megabytes per second download speed and 10 megabytes per second upload speed. But One of the things we look at is the availability of retail internet services by technology and speed from Innovation Science and Economic Development Canada. And this is called the ISED road data. When we break these down, we have a different comfort level with the data as compared with the speed tests we received back from probably some of you. Some are higher, some are lower, and this could be for any number of reasons. The road segments themselves, those ISED road data, are actually 67% served. So when I said served, I meant the retail internet services are available, but the premises along the road segments are actually 96% served. So on the whole, the district is relatively well served. But when you look at each community, there are some people that have great connections, some people that have very poor connections. And also when you drill down to the community level, there are some communities that are really well served, and then also some that are really underserved. So at this point, we're drilling down to the community level to see which communities are the most underserved and will be chosen for the community level engagement and community connectivity plans. And speaking of, right now, we've just completed this current state analysis, and we're in the middle of completing a gap analysis to help identify and select the most underserviced communities in Cowichan. On the engagement side, we have a survey open to the public, and hopefully some of you have completed it. That's going to help us gain some insight into how people use the internet, where they see gaps in the community, your vision for connectivity in the region. And these things are all going to come together to form a regional connectivity strategy early this summer. After that, we're going to identify the underserviced communities and perform some community level engagement, and those are going to form the community connectivity plans. Some future steps. So after all of this is completed and we have our connectivity strategy and gap assessment and our community level plans, there are still a lot of steps that go into building and operating a functional connected network. Without getting into too much detail, we need to know if there is any market demand, what the current infrastructure looks like. We then build the business case to try to secure funding and partners if possible. When you have more cooperation and partners, costs can be spread out among more people, businesses, organizations, or spread out over time. Then when you have funding lined up, someone is hired to design the layout of the broadband strategy, the layout of the actual fiber network to minimize costs and maximize efficiency. Someone also has to oversee construction and implementation. So for example, if fiber optic lines are being laid into the ground, it's most efficient if they're put in alongside other utilities or roads so that they don't have to dig up the ground multiple times. There's also public consultation that needs to happen with many of these technologies to ensure the public is aware of their construction. And finally, depending on the model, the operation and management of the system can be handled by one or more owners of the system, depending on who owns the infrastructure or technology. So that looks like a lot of steps, but it should be noted that a lot of these can occur simultaneously, and it doesn't necessarily have to take a lot of time. Now that I have done so much talking, I would like to get a little bit of participation. We are going to do a visioning exercise. I'm going to be using a program called Mentimeter to gather some feedback and create a word cloud. I'm going to ask you to go to this website, www.menti.com. I don't know how many people are visiting just using audio, so it's www.menti.com. And Amanda also is going to put it in the chat, so you can just click on it if you want. And if you're just going to the website, you can also put in code 4910-8390. And we're going to just answer the question, what do you see as the biggest challenge to achieving connectivity in Cowichan Valley? I'm just going to change my screen over. We're going to do this twice. And the first one we're going to answer is this one here. There we go. That's better. Okay. So just going to make sure that everybody can see my screen and that this is it. There we go. Okay. So you should be able to enter in a couple of answers. And as we enter in answers, we should be generating a word cloud. So feel free to enter in, there should be 3 boxes when you go to menti.com. And if you feel free to enter in the same thing as somebody else, if you see something that resonates with you, you can enter in as many words as you like. You just have to enter them in 3 at a time. So you can re-enter, you can resubmit. And so just going to talk a little bit about what do you see as the biggest challenge to achieving connectivity in Cowichan Valley. And I'll give you a couple minutes. We're essentially right on time. So yay us. Got a couple things up here. Cost of infrastructure, geography, cost. Oh, look at all of these rolling in. I love it. We'll take about, I'll set up a timer here. We'll take about 5 more minutes. And just so you're aware, we're going to take this word cloud and we're going to include it in our engagement report. And it's going to help inform the vision for connectivity. Got some nice answers rolling in. Looks like cost, funding, and location so far are the most popular. Still some answers rolling in.
Getting some interesting answers here. Like
Mhm.
it.
If you see anything up there that resonates with you, feel free to type it in again and essentially vote for that. All right, I'm going to give you a 1-minute warning. We have 1 minute left to put in any last answers on what do you see as the biggest challenge to achieving connectivity in Cowichan Valley? All right, that's wonderful. Okay, we're going to move on to the next one, which is the opposite of that, or I guess maybe the flip side is a better way to put it. And if you are still on that same screen, you should see it switch to what aspects of life would be improved with enhanced connectivity. So if you were thinking about what were some barriers, start thinking about what aspects of life would be improved if you did have enhanced connectivity. We'll give about 6 minutes for this one because I didn't start my timer early enough for the last one.
And just to confirm, it is the same link that is posted in the chat. So the page should refresh for you.
Already got 4 answers in there.
I like this group. They're like really into the positive side.
Yeah,
Awesome.
we really had to push everyone to think of those constraints. All the improvements are just rolling in.
Mm-hmm.
I like it. These could also be not just aspects of your life, but aspects of life for maybe somebody that is not here that couldn't make it, aspects of society, just some other things to think about.
Yeah, I think we can think about different types of groups too, like families with young kids or older folks or different things, and how connectivity can make improvements for all kinds of people.
Mm-hmm. A lot of great answers. Keep it up. All right, I'm not seeing any more answers coming in, but I'm just gonna give another 30 seconds for anybody who wants to post any more answers before we close this one off. Did you hear that? Somebody scored in the hockey game.
My partner's downstairs watching the NFL draft. I'm surprised we're not hearing him screaming.
All right, that's great. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for your participation. This is a great insight. Lots of good answers here. Okay. All right, so that about wraps up our presentation here. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go through some questions. So if anybody has any questions, please leave them in the question and answer box. So just again, here's the instructions again. Go down, open up the question panel by clicking on these three little dots down here and select all panelists and then type your question and click send. We have a bunch of experts here, so we will ask the appropriate question to the appropriate person. And I can't see the attendees list right now given my screen, so maybe could either Amanda or Brittany, could you let me know if there's any phone callers?
Yeah, I think we're good. Anne had originally called in, but she just texted me she finally made it into WebEx itself. So
okay, perfect. So I don't need to have
perfect timing.
I don't have to go through that whole like spiel again about how to.
No, I think we're okay.
Okay, perfect. All right.
And I think we're a pretty small group, so if anyone would prefer to ask a question, like to be unmuted and ask a question verbally, there is a little little hand icon at the bottom of the screen, kind of where the mute button is and all that jazz. If anyone wants to raise a hand and be unmuted, we can probably accomplish that as well.
There's no questions at the moment in here, but we'll just give a couple minutes here and see if anything pops up.
I wonder if anyone from the IBI team would like to maybe chat about how we might address remote communities in Cowichan. We have, you know, communities all the way on the West Coast that have some challenges, or any thoughts on that? Or are we looking at like a Starlink satellite situation, or what's the general gist of remote communities?
Mitch, would you like to take this question, or Keith or John?
Yeah, I can take a first step, unless Keith, you want to take it. I know that's more you're used to talking about this, but when looking at the more remote communities, there's multiple different ways that we can address the type of connectivity, as well as the what is desired by the community as well, because it is a two-way process that we would like to engage with the communities, understand what their not only their needs are, but what their desires are, whether it's economic development or education purposes. And that can generally be help us to find what the best solution is for that community. Now, as Asia mentioned before, the standard that the government is pushing is heavily tilted towards fiber optic solutions. And certainly with the broadband fund that they're proposing, with the significant funding availability, depending on the need of the community, there is certainly available funds for that. Now, obviously, there comes a point at which it does not become financially viable, and then we would look to the next level of connectivity, or whether that is a cellular solution or a cellular backhaul solution, plus a distributed Wi-Fi or even distributed cable solution for the community itself. There's multiple ways that we can solve problems these days, and the technology is certainly moving very quickly. So given that not only the technology is moving quickly, but the needs for connectivity is moving very quickly. Certainly over the last 10 years, we've seen such an exponential growth of not only devices in the home or in the business space. The need for connectivity continues to rise, and it's something that we very much are trying to plan for the future for our community, as well as understand what the potential is for that community as well. I notice Anne's put her hand up there. Brittany, if she has a question there.
And let me unmute you. Hang on one sec. There we go. And you are unmuted. Go ahead with your question.
Okay, you can hear me okay now?
You're a little quiet, but yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'll try to talk louder and maybe closer.
Perfect.
Okay, so yeah, I'm like the walking example of my connectivity issues, and so we have a unique situation in that our internet is provided by TELUS through fiber optics from Port Alberni to Yubo, and then it's radioed over to our Nitnat Lake, and then it's within the community is fiber. So we're doing a combination of all ways of how to get connectivity. And although it is pretty fast in some regards, it's extremely slow. Like I just did a speed test on my while I was downloading the WebEx, which took 40 minutes for me to download.
Anne and I have been texting this whole time.
Yes.
She's been giving me screenshots of her download. Yeah.
Yes. And so, you know, to just as like an example of that, my speed test came as I was pinged at 18 ms. My download was 2.13 and my upload was 1.44. So, and I'm in a room, like I just got my landline connected because my voice over IP phone did not work. And so I had to call Intellis again to get an actual landline installed. And unfortunately, because we're a reserve and the poverty level that we have here, people have to choose between having internet or phone, not both. We don't have our cell service at all. So people do have their cell phones, but it's a device for their internet. So our main communication is through Facebook Messenger. So we've got quite a variety of making things work, but these are barriers that the average person doesn't have to go through just to get an education, just to order groceries. You know, we have to go 86 kilometers to the next town to buy our groceries. So there's all these extra layers of our remoteness. And we've certainly overcome quite a bit, and we've come a long way. We did have ExploreNet, but ExploreNet has stopped coming into our community. They've refused to hook up any new ones. We just had, I don't know if anybody's familiar with Ultimac in Duncan, but they're our IT support. And so they've ordered and they requested to have a Starlink satellite. Because now we're also talking about not just the connectivity, but we're also talking about companies who have, how do I put it? Our nation has a contract with a company to have exclusive rights to our internet. And so now we're getting a Starlink to have full access so that I can run the business of our gas station and our store uninterrupted. Also, just even parts of our businesses, the Moneris machines, our debit and credit card machine, the Moneris themselves, they're not even making devices that have a phone connection in it. They are using cellular and mobile only. And or internet. So if we don't have, we're already at half because we have the cellular part to it. So yeah, so these are very much the interesting ways that we are probably at the 1980s level of technology when everybody else is thinking in the 2050s. So that's kind of like my commentary and my anecdotes of my just experience of sitting here in my little room in Nat Lake. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. That's super interesting to hear from you because we've heard lots of different stories of how the internet is out your way. And we did hear about the TELUS build out there that we were told was fiber. But it's obviously kind of like a fake fiber situation. So really good to know that. Thank you for sharing.
And it's, sorry if I could speak for a moment, it's very important that we hear about these situations because with this process of what we're trying to achieve, most of our data is coming from the government reported information that these carriers provide. And therefore, if we can't challenge that information, then we're challenged with trying to find ways to get projects or get connectivity improvements to those areas. John, have you got any comments to that? Just I see that Joanne has also got her hand up, but John, have you got any comments to that point as well?
Yeah, it's very interesting, and there are a number of ways to tackle the problem. One of the hopes is that we'll be able to uncover opportunities to work with the private sector to help perhaps find ways to um, get some funding to help make their business case a little more positive and encourage ISPs to get out there and deliver service. So obviously challenging in very remote areas. But I think one of the keys we're seeing in some of the rural areas in Ontario is trying to help build out backbone infrastructure and enable ISPs to jump onto that backbone and therefore spend most of their money on connecting the households to the backbone. So some potentially innovative approaches to help work together with the private sector to make this a possibility to deliver better service.
Great. And I think Joanne's put a couple of questions in the Q&A, but she also has her hand up. So I'll just unmute you, Joanne, so you can chat with us. Okay, Joanne, you should be able to unmute yourself. There you go. You got it.
I'm just not sure if there can be prioritizations put on certain areas to receive their fiber optic connections first. I mean, you have outlined that certainly the First Nations or Indigenous populations are very limited as far as what they are receiving in regard to uploads and downloads. So can we prioritize, or does there have to be a certain way of the fiber optics being put into place? I'm not really sure that I understand how widespread the system has to be in order to make it viable to start with.
Mitch or John, any comments on the viability? I would say maybe that in terms of this project, we are going to be prioritizing underserved communities and choosing during this phase to look at in more depth to develop that community level connectivity plan and how to move forward with connectivity in those 4 communities and hopefully using those as sort of templates or examples to approach other underserved communities in the region, with the goal being, of course, to address all of them. But in terms of making the business case work, I don't know, IBI team, if you have any comments on that.
Keith, I wonder if you would like to speak to that one.
Sure. Yeah, and certainly, one of the challenges with rural broadband systems is that as we think about communities that are further and further away from major urban centers, it's fairly common that the further that you're away from an urban center, the less capacity the infrastructure has. So the communities at the end of the line, if you like, if we think about it that way, usually have the greatest need. But of course, most telecommunication systems are built in a linear fashion. So you just can't start building at the end community to achieve the overall connectivity. There does need to be a bit of a sequenced approach and a way to build from usually from most dense to least dense areas. So certainly that has an impact on prioritization. The impact of funding from higher levels of government allows those bigger types of projects to be undertaken. So the priority mechanism is usually ranked against the community's need versus other communities, and the actual physical requirements and ultimately costs to build a system to reach that community and what other communities could and would be connected along the way.
Thank you.
Hopefully that sheds some light.
Yeah, I think that gives me better idea. You just have to build the infrastructure out to the places that are most needy, and they're going to be the furthest from from connectivity, basically.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
normally
yeah.
that is the case.
One other
Except,
question, there was
except,
Telescope that is in Lake Cowichan, and they had a lot of fiber optic cable running at one time, which I think was not utilized when they had to economically downsize and cut back on what they were doing. But they do have a lot of fiber optic around, as far as I know. Now that's out that way. It's out in Lake Cowichan. Is there any existing fiber optic systems that can be utilized that maybe weren't known about so much?
Yeah, so the somewhat the less intuitive issues with broadband and fiber optic infrastructure owned by TELUS or any other company is that even though it feels like it should be there for use and benefit of the community and should be able to be accessed for other purposes, it is really private infrastructure, and it would require collaboration, interaction, and likely a good working relationship to be able to take that existing infrastructure and build upon it, whether it be TELUS or any other party. So that's, unfortunately, that's the nature of the telecommunications industry in Canada, is that it has been built out by private investment, and the government funding, provincial and federal funding that's coming forward, will start to build out what are known in the industry as open access networks, where the public entity, the regional district or some other public body would have control and say over how that infrastructure is used in the future. So it's certainly a possibility that TELUS or anyone else's infrastructure could be part of the solution, but it does require consent and agreement from those parties that currently own the infrastructure.
I appreciate that. Could I ask one more thing? What is a subsea fiber optic cable landing site? What is
Oh.
that?
That
it sounds like Connected Coast.
That's
Yes.
a great question.
Yeah. It's since I've had the floor, I'll take the question. It's very common to lay fiber optic cable in the ocean on the seabed, and the landing site is simply where that cable comes ashore to its first point on land, where it's brought to an equipment cabinet and connected to other cables that deliver the signal to homes and businesses.
Okay, so are we proposing these fiber optic cables would be under the sea then? Is this what?
Yes, so there is currently a program in BC that was initiated many years ago called the Connected Coast Program to essentially install fiber optic cable around around at certain points around Vancouver Island and the mainland, and that the cable landing stations are locations that were designated by that project for that cable to come ashore.
Okay, but that's private though. This is private.
The Connected Coast program is a public-private partnership. So while there is City West, that is the private carrier that is a co-investor in it. There's public money from many levels of government in that project. So the infrastructure is designed to be shared and accessible by all.
Okay, so that's an option for usage then.
That's
Right.
what that may mean is that one of the potential strategies may be to build out from those landing points, so that it won't necessarily mean that we have to build out from the most densely populated areas to the least densely populated areas. We may be able to start from those landing points and build out from there. So if I recall correctly, there are 3 potential landing sites in Cowichan Valley. So, there may be opportunity to attack this from multiple angles rather than one starting point.
Oh, excellent. Some creativity. Yeah. This is what we're looking at now.
There's some of them. Yeah.
Oh, great.
All right. Any other questions there?
I guess just one other thing. Can I ask? Road segments, which it says, you say 67% versus 96%. I don't understand the difference there.
So from the data that we looked at, approximately 96% of households appear to be, or of locations appear to be connected. So that's the premises themselves. But those premises are concentrated in certain areas, and only 67% of the road lengths, if you will, are covered. So if all of the premises were evenly spaced out across the roads, then we'd have an equivalent of 96% coverage. But only 67% of the roadway by distance has a broadband infrastructure nearby it.
Okay, that's where our discrepancies come in. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
All right, so we've got just about 13 minutes left here. So there are a couple other questions that are coming in the Q&A. So I just want to see if we can address a couple of these as well. One of the questions which we've sort of talked about here, but I thought maybe we can just address a little bit more clearly, is just on the timeline. A couple of questions just about when improved connectivity is expected. And I think maybe, I don't know, John or Keith or Mitch, if you want to just talk a little bit about the actual strategy being just that, more of a strategy and recommendation for implementation rather than actually a plan that will be to put things in the ground with a specific timeline. So I don't know if you want to just talk a little bit more about that, that timeline process.
Yeah, thank you. We're not at a stage to specify precise timing. Being still in the planning and understanding needs stage. From a higher level government perspective, the federal and provincial funding has high level objectives of completing the projects that are funded with that grant infrastructure in 2027. And that's I'll say a distant pin in the future timeline, as to give you a sense of very roughly what the objectives are, but going into any additional detail is we're just not at the stage to talk about that right now.
Great, thank you, Keith. Okay, another question here, and I apologize if I don't understand it correctly, but it looks like the question is around partnering with roads as an option for a win-win scenario. So the example here is i.e. moth or forest roads. I don't know, Keith, if you've got any comments just on partnerships with roads.
Like a dig once kind of policy, like with
it is very common and certainly a best practice as communities start to focus on how to improve broadband, is to combine the cost to construct the infrastructure with other costs of linear infrastructure. So when I say linear infrastructure, roads, bridges are a prime example of that, where the investment to either create a road or improve a road, the cost to install fiber optic infrastructure at the same time is very small, because most of the earthwork, the civil work, can be done as part of the road project. So that is certainly something that in a comprehensive connectivity strategy is one key piece of it, aligning the planned investment in road infrastructure and allowing fiber optic infrastructure to be placed at the same time.
Great, thank you, Keith. And the rest of these questions do look like they're leaning towards a timeline again. So I think we've addressed them, but if there's anything that is burning that anyone wants to ask that you don't think we've answered here, please do let us know. You can either put that in the chat or raise your hand. Not seeing anything. Brittany, do you see any raised hands? I can't actually see that screen.
No, I don't see any more raised hands.
Okay.
Oh, Joanne just raised her hand.
Oh.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Oh, hi there. Just a last thing. What is the downside to fiber optic versus any of the other systems?
Cost, right? Right, IBI?
Yeah,
It's expensive.
it's expensive.
Well,
Yeah.
let's just be clear on that one. The initial cost of installation is high, but the life cycle of a fiber internet service or a fiber infrastructure is a lot longer than any of the other technologies from a capacity perspective. So when we look to a business model for fiber infrastructure, we're talking about, say, 25 plus years of life cycle, whereas in a wireless infrastructure or something along those lines, technology moves quite quickly, and capacity increases or requirements require us to replace wireless gear as often as every 5 years. So although the short-term cost of a fiber optic network is much higher than a wireless infrastructure, the long-term cost is substantially a much better suited for a community paid for solution. But then again, it does depend on the situation in itself, how dispersed the homes are, or the properties are, or the connectors, or the subscribers are, because of course, when we talk about very remote individual homes or properties, then the cost of a fiber network versus a short-term wireless solution is never going to make sense. So it really does come down to the individual requirements of the community, all the way down to the individual subscriber or property owner.
Okay, thank you. What about the environmental impact of the fiber optics versus any of the other systems?
It's a good one. Asia is probably the best one to answer that one. Only because I want to put her on the spot. That's for sure.
Overall, I would say it's lower. Either way, you're going to have infrastructure, and in terms of the electricity usage per, I would guess say watts per megabyte, it is lower. You can also do other things with fiber optic, some really interesting applications that are way beyond the scope of this presentation. That include smart cities and solar panels and really cool things like that. But either way, you're going to have infrastructure, and whether it is a cellular tower or DSL cables or what have you, the fiber optic is the better option.
But, well, that's an important thing to be considering for this for sure too. Yeah, thank you.
The most common objections from an environmental perspective for wireless solutions and do involve the construction of radio towers, which of course there is, it is required oftentimes to clear a small piece of land to construct it. and many communities are not fans of the aesthetic of constructing radio towers in terms of how they change the sight lines and the actual aesthetic of the local area.
And unfortunately, the location of where we generally want to design and put a tower is the most obvious point in the area, because we want the height and visibility to be so it is most effective. So that is often a significant consideration.
Thank you.
So we just have one more question that's come in here, and I'll say let's take this as the last one because we've only got a couple minutes left, and then we can move to wrap up. So last question here is, once a fiber network is to the home, how is the management of billing and network selection handled? Example, TELUS versus Shaw. Who would like to answer that question from my team here?
Sure, I can take that. Certainly as I was speaking a bit before, with publicly funded fiber optic infrastructure, we look to other jurisdictions who are a bit ahead of Canada in this environment, namely areas in Europe, Sweden, and other locations where community-based fiber networks are managed by a network operator that the community selects to keep the basic infrastructure well maintained. But it creates a marketplace where many retailers, both big and small, TELUS, Shaw, and even local retailers are able to provide brand and provide their own flavor of services over the network. So if done with that in mind, it does create a competitive marketplace for retail services and allows some differentiation between price and service levels, while still having a robust infrastructure that's maintained for the community's benefit.
Great, thank you, Keith. All right, with that, I think we'll wrap it up. Bernie, did you have any closing remarks that you wanted to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much to the team, Asia and Amanda and Keith and John and Mitch, the whole team. Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for coming tonight, participating in the exercises and bringing your questions. It's super important for us to get your feedback and your comments to help guide the strategy. In terms of next steps, I see that Asia's put the engagement website and survey link up on the screen. Amanda, I don't know if you can post that in the chat as well. So if you have not already done so, please complete the survey on the engagement website. And please share it with your neighbors, especially if you happen to be in an area that has poor connectivity. Let's hear from your neighbors too and get that resounding, indication of poor connectivity in your area. So please share the survey with others. The deadline to complete the survey is this Saturday, April 30th. So now is a good time. We'll be compiling all the feedback that we're receiving tonight and through the survey and other sources, and developing that vision for the future of connectivity so that we know what we're aiming for with our strategy. And the recording of tonight's presentation will be posted to the project website, as well as the word clouds that we worked on together. And in a few weeks, we'll be posting a summary of all the engagement activities. So please stay tuned to the website for those updates. Asia, Amanda, anything I'm missing before we say goodnight?
No, I think you've covered it all.
Okay.
Just thank you for everybody, for everybody's opinion, and thank you all for showing up and giving us your input.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.